Welcome to this week's virtual brown bag storytelling series. Glad to have you here. I'm Katie Adams with the Treasure Pioneers Museum. This week I'm taking you back to 1998, or actually back to the 1930s through 50s in Steamboat Springs. This talk brings you a distinguished panel of ladies who knew Steamboat best. You're going to hear from Annabeth Lockhart, Gloria Gossard, Doris Gooding, and Ann Gooding Rich as they tell us about growing up in Steamboat Springs. As always, visit our website, treasurepioneers.org, to access more content, as well as a list of our outdoor offerings, programs, and events.
Our program today. With that, we are honored to have Annabeth Lockhart, Gloria Gossard, Doris Gooding, and Ann Rich with us today. Now, some of you may know them and have known them for a while, and I think this back row may be the culprit. You may either want to duck or, stay, put your paper up in front of your, We don't know what's going to happen here today, but I'm not going to hold back. We're going to come out right, and hit them head on with questions here. So are you ladies ready?
Yeah. Sure.
They've all lived here all their lives. They were born and raised here. Is that correct? Or at least raised here as children. And high school students, and then probably went off and came back. We can discuss that on a one-to-one basis after the program. But let's just get right to the meat of it. Okay, Gloria. Who'd you date in high school, and where did you go on a date?
I thought you weren't supposed to kiss and tell. Okay, I think that the sort of custom here was to go steady with your boyfriends, for maybe years or even months or even a week, But I never seemed to last too long in that, so I dated a number of boys, and one of my, maybe a year long steady was Stuart Dismute, whose father was a surveyor here for many years, and Stuart later became an atomic scientist at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, after the war. And don't ask me what war, you already know. And then I dated several other high school classmates, including Dewey Heyer, Albert Leonard, Bill Hill, whose nickname was Bull Hill.
Best football player.
Yeah, football player. And so on. And then during my I think it was senior year, I met one of those divine older men who was 4 years older than I was. He was in college at Colorado University, and I was, I guess, a junior in high school. And he was so smooth, sophisticated. He taught me how to do that dance of that time, the Big Apple. And so, anyway, what we did on dates was frequently the movies. And after the movies, we had access to 2 soda fountains, 2 drugstores in town. One, Ballard Drug, was the name of the one, and Chamberlain Gray was the other one. And they frequently stayed open after the movies because there was a gigantic crowd to come to the soda fountain, and have everything from tin roofs to milkshakes to Cokes and so on. So we did things like that, and we went to many school things on dates, and we also went on picnics, and we certainly supported the swimming pool, and so that gives you a little bit of a view, and I'm going to shut up before somebody shuts me up. Just one further thing I would like to note here is that in this very room, I learned to dance. This was the Welch house, and one of the Welch daughters, Mabel, I was in probably about junior high or freshman in high school. And she invited a number of us, couples, to come here, and she taught us to dance.
Did you marry any of your high school sweethearts? I mean, did you marry any of those high school?
Well, not any of them, no. We've got a couple of people who did, don't worry.
Okay, let's just ask of everybody, how many in this room took dance lessons in here when they were in school? Do you remember? Yeah, there's a couple others, yeah. And Bob Wither isn't here, and we know he did.
Yes, he did.
And it was all up at the Welch house. And
this is the Welsh house.
This is the Welch house.
Okay, Doris, you're next.
Okay.
Same question. Who'd you date in high school?
Well, I went with the man I married. In the 8th grade, I was allowed to go to Sunday afternoon movies. When I was a freshman, this young man came to town, and he had a convertible, and oh boy. So I went with him for 3 years, steady. And I hated my husband, to be. And I just couldn't stand it. And then when I was about the end of my junior year, and maybe my senior year, I started to get a little interested. And ended up marrying the fellow I went with in the 8th grade.
That's great.
Annabeth?
Who did I date?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just about anybody. I would say I had a lot of fun. But my very favorite one, I married, and he's in the audience, my husband, Lloyd. Lockhart. Yeah, raise your hand.
But Gloria didn't tell everything about what we did on dates. And I
This is why I've got 4 of you, so that you keep a track of each other.
Marty, were they all in high school at the same time?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
we
what,
were.
about what year would that have been?
Never mind.
I graduated in 40.
Thank you.
So did Doris.
We did. But we're
She
not
was a
telling.
little ahead of
39.
and so was Ann.
So was Ann. Annabeth and I started in the 1st grade and went through the 12th grade together. We were best friends for years and years. We were.
We met in Sunday school. That was a good place.
That was a good place.
When we were 3.
So Doris, if Gloria didn't tell all, what are you going to tell?
I'm not telling either.
And what can you add to this? Who did you date in high school?
Well, before high school, I learned to dance during junior high here in this room, but it was turned this way, so that that wall was the north wall over here, and the piano was over in this corner, and it was played by Mabel Welch herself, or maybe her older sister Luella. The high point of the music always was their father, who was Charlie Welch, and he came early on, before 1900, and was a rancher not too far west in town. It was a very happy family, which made a nice background for a small group of growing people, and we had a fine time in this place because of that. In high school, I dated Gloria's brother, Bill, somewhat older than she, and not in high school when I was. I remember first the dress-up date, the very first one I had, was out to dinner at the Cabin Hotel, which was where the library is now. And it had a lovely dining room that looked out over the Yampa River flowing off to the west. I was wearing a coral suit I remember it well. I don't see anybody here wearing that same color, but it's in my head. And I saw Bill for a few years, and then began going with kids who were in college while I was still in high school. So I was not as much a part of the high school social life as my friends with whom I was in school, and I regret that.
Well, this is a big recreational town. Were you involved in sports when you were in high school or junior high, and which ones, Annabeth?
Well, as far as the school was concerned, there weren't any sports for girls.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes, remember volleyball and basketball? We were,
Intramural stuff.
yeah. Oh,
But not
my.
anything big.
I trained for the first ladies' Olympics skiing. It had not yet been held, but there was a...
Still waiting.
You were training.
I was training. As a matter of fact, ski up to the quarry before school. Now that's, it have to be in March when the snow is really fast, both up and down. And not any other time of the year, but that was fun.
How many students would have been in your graduating class? Approximately how many from high school?
24.
25.
29.
29, there we go, in different classes.
22.
What was the ladies' recreational club? Who can talk, can you talk about that?
We were too young.
Okay.
Yeah, but they gave us these cups for our
they
little
gave-
ski club, for our little girls' ski club.
And
Doris
for
has
the
one and I
jumping,
have one.
yeah.
I should have brought it.
They were known as the LRCs.
Okay, and what else did they do? Were they, I mean, and besides give you guys trophies, were they,
Sponsored diamond hitches at the ski carnival.
And they did a lot of sports themselves. I think they took
Yeah, they did.
ski trips and things.
Two living ones. Pearl Staley.
Arlene has a
yeah,
contribution there.
Please speak up.
Pearl Staley and Leslie Yont
Oh,
were
sure.
original members.
Sure.
Yeah. And they're both still alive.
Yeah.
They went on skiing trips and did lots of them.
Doris,
What was
weren't
Winter
you-
Carnival like in your days? What was Winter Carnival like?
Oh, it was the second biggest deal of the year. I mean, we had diamond hitches. We worked for months. And
What is that? What is a diamond hitch?
well, you're pulled by horses. I mean, way back then, you were pulled by horses. And then there'd be one here, and then one here, and one here, and one back here, just in the shape of a diamond. And you had to hold the diamond formation all the way up Main Street.
On skis.
On skis. And the costumes were fabulous.
Well, you all ski jumped, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we got our cups for.
I jumped, but I didn't get a cup.
Was skiing pretty much an activity that everyone shares in? I mean, from the time you were real small, was it?
We had to. That was, if you didn't, you stayed home.
Doris, correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't you the drum major of the first Ski Eyes band we had?
No, Annie was.
No, and
And you followed?
Then I was the second one.
Okay.
I took over in the 8th grade, I think. Left through high school.
What kind of ski lift did you have? What kind of ski lift? Did you have rope tow or?
Will somebody kindly show that old movie about the boat tow?
We had the boat tow.
You had a rope tow?
A boat.
We called it the boat tow.
It was a boat. It was wooden all the way. And you had seats. There were, I think, 4 or 5 seats in it. And it was pulled by a cable from the top of the mountain. And it would form valleys and hills. And you'd go up and then you'd drop down. And then you'd go up. And then it'd go off its track, and then you'd have to stop. So we'd get it back on the track, and then you'd go up and down. But they finally got up there. I might add that even after I was married, I had a miscarriage because of that boat tow.
And if it didn't go off the track, about how long did it take to get from the bottom to the top?
Oh, gosh.
5 minutes.
5, 10 minutes.
Yeah. And we couldn't ride it most of the time because in the afternoon after school, it was used for the jumpers who were practicing ski jumpers to get up to the top of houses. But when they weren't on it, then we could use it.
Yeah, one went up and one came down, and you were lucky if they didn't hit.
Did any of you play instruments in the ski bands? You two are the majorettes, but did you play instruments? Tell us about playing in the band in the wintertime. Anne?
Well, I was first bass drum because it was the only way I could get in the band. I was a part of the school orchestra that played violin, and that wasn't acceptable for a band, but the bass drum was fine. And later was a snare drum, and I was kind of glad to shuck both of those to become the drum major, and that was a wonderful place for an exhibitionist.
I played a clarinet, and I think the reason I was terrible, but the reason I kept on was to get to keep on being the majorette. But during the winter when we performed, which we always did during the winter, especially for Ski Carnival, all our instruments would freeze, and that was a disaster, believe me. But we still went ahead and maneuvered, and it was a pretty good band.
Did you travel anywhere with the ski band?
First one went to Chicago on roller skates. I mean, the skis were put on roller skates. And then we went to Denver, and then I think the shortest trip we ever went was Hot Sulphur. We got to go on the train.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, I did.
How many were in this band?
Oh, probably 40, 45. It was pretty, we had a great music department in school.
Everyone was in it, that played an instrument, whether you were any good or not.
And like they said, is what instrument you played depended on how quickly they needed that instrument in the band and you could get in. So I played a hot trumpet. She did. Fortunately, there was a young man there that always played first chair because he was good. And the rest of us who played trumpet just sort of sat there,
Let's talk about your families. Anne, what did your family do in town?
Well, the first thought I had before you asked me that question was about my brother Gates.
My husband.
Gates Gooding. He wanted to be a part of the band, and the folks said, sure, we'll get you an instrument. But what they got him was an oboe. And it's very difficult to learn. It's a double reed, and it takes a long time to master it. And he decided in short order he didn't like that, but he was not allowed to quit. And so he went all out to make life so miserable at home. We're all for it. He's giving it away.
And he'd always squeal every time he had to play a solo. I mean, the oboe would squeak every time.
We all had families here, and
That's why we were here.
actually, yes.
No kidding.
My father was a lawyer, my mother was a Latin teacher, and that's not existent now. And my dad was judge for a long time. Doris?
And my father had a leather business and also did some shoe repairing, and he helped all the kids in town. And we had the building, which is now La Pagé.
Oh. And what was that leather goods company called?
Well, it was called Harwick's. And we sold up to all the ranchers, you know, boots and saddles, and sort of like we were in competition with FM Light. But small competition.
So Annabeth, your parents?
My parents were, well, my grandparents were the FM Lights, and my dad was the oldest son of the FM Light and Sons. And I was raised with 5 siblings. And I have a cousin sitting in the back row.
I'm here to see if she tells the truth.
Am I?
Gloria? What's your... Wake up. What did your parents do?
Well, we had a ranch in Moffat County, not in Routt County. And then when we first came here to live, which was, well, I know you don't care about the years, but anyway, when we first came here to live, we had spent a couple summers out here staying at the Cabin Hotel. And then we had, when we eventually came here to live, which was in the 30s, my dad leased what they called the townside property. And the University of Colorado apparently owned that or had it in trust or something for Steamboat Springs. And so Dad just leased it because he wanted to, at that point, he wanted to make Steamboat Springs the American spa, comparable to the spas in Europe. And the spas were the big thing then. And he thought, with all these mineral springs, we've got the water, all we need to do is bottle it, market it, and we're going to be in business here, this town is, you know. So he did do some repair work around the springs, and along with this townside lease was included the swimming pool and the rodeo grounds, and not the hot springs, but that was at that time, I think, owned by the city too, but we didn't have that. That was too far out of town then. And so anyway, that's what he did for a while. And that, you see, was in the 30s, and the worst depression America had yet faced. And so after the lease expired, Dad didn't expire, but he couldn't. Yeah, he couldn't go ahead with the lease because there wasn't enough money in this sort of a thing. And obviously, in the deep darkness of the Depression, the last thing people were going to spend money on was bottled mineral water. So he went to ranching then, I mean more on the ranch.
Well, yeah, we have some pretty famous names for Steamboat here, the Light and Gossard and Gooding and Harwick. But if you don't mind, Gloria, I'm going to ask you to tell us something that your dad did earlier, because I think that this crowd...
They might appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Carol had given us, her sister-in-law, after Gloria's brother passed away recently, Kevin and Jane and I were down in Denver, and Carol gave us some ads. I don't have them today, but that were pretty interesting. So if you will tell.
Yes, well, my father was the founder of the H.W. Gossard Corset Company. And it existed for many years until, just maybe the past 6 or 7 years. It had been purchased by other companies because somehow the interest in corsets had waned. I think I still have one, a brand new one of my mother's that was well boned, you know, but she had that sort of an hourglass look to her, and that was partly why, you know, and because she wore a corset all her life. But that's when my brother and I were born in Chicago, and that's where my dad had started and had the business. And so what else can I say?
You kept them all in shape.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Judy. That's a cute one.
Here's a kind of a different question. You know, Steamboat was a very small town when you all lived here, I believe. I don't remember what the population was at that time.
1,300.
And I know that, you know, sometimes they close Ravier's Pass in the winter.
Yes.
Did you feel isolated living here? Tell us about, you know, did you feel like you were going to the outside? Did you go to Denver? How did you get there? You know, that type of thing. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
On the choo-choo train. It went over the divide then. There was no Moffat Tunnel. But you couldn't take that.
Yeah.
It sometimes took days to get there. Because they had snow sheds. They call snow sheds up on top. Way up there. I've forgotten what the altitude was up there.
It was
11,000
pounds.
Yeah,
to 14,000.
Yeah, oh, yeah. And these snow sheds were for the train to go through and not just get drenched and weighted down with snow and stopped even. And of course, in those days, they weren't diesel. They were, you know, coal burning, steam engines. And every now and then in those snow sheds, sparks would fly, and so would the snow sheds. They'd catch on fire. And you could be marooned up there for a couple of days. Fortunately, they did have sort of a little cafeteria thing on the train, so they did have some supplies and all, if you can call it that. And some of you, I'm sure, have heard of the late Eleanor Bliss and Marjorie Perry. At least the ones here heard of that. They used to ride that train a lot and always took their skis because they knew it was going to be slow going, and they loved to get out and ski around on Corona Pass.
Anybody else, as you were living here, did you feel like you couldn't get out, or did you have enough to do here that...
We were terribly busy, really. I mean, but we made our own fun.
Like, elaborate on that. What did you do?
Oh, we skied, and we, in the summer it was marshmallow roasts and swimming and picnics and you know, going to the movies, and as Gloria said, then we'd go to the soda fountain, but we made our own fun. And we had gangs growing up, not the kind of gangs now. We'd play run, sheep, run, and kick the can and red light. Not the red light. But my grandchildren now say, Grandma, what was all that about? They've never heard of it. But we had great times. And the boys would play football, and the girls would swipe the football. And
we did have winter teams that were outstanding. The ski team that I participated in had 2 girls and 9 boys, and there were we weren't isolated. I think of all the places we did go because they were available to us. The roads were not always open all of the time, but part was enough. There were ski clubs at Hot Sulphur and Granby and Grand Lake. Genesee, we went, stayed in Denver, and then by motor back to the Genesee ski area for the ski meet. So I don't feel that we were stuck here.
Ski coaches, who were some of the coaches?
Some of the coaches. The first one to teach slalom here was Bob Balch, and he came from Austria, I believe. His accent was a little heavy, but he was quite American. Our first hill was on the way out of town towards Strawberry Park. There is a rather nice hill, which is beside what we knew as Rulin's Ranch. What else? Reister's Ranch.
It's a dairy.
Gleason's Ranch. It's the red one with the white trim. But it was enough of a hill that if we would pack it and turn car lights on it as it got dark, we could ski on it. And he showed us for the very first how to make turns. Stem was not what he was teaching at all, but the sliding turn with the weight quite differently arranged from the forward weight that he knew before. And I don't remember an outstanding coach in my time beyond him, but we surely had a great many. Wegeman was quite a bit later, wasn't he?
Yeah,
He was after the war.
Yeah.
Back to the families. Annabeth, I know that your grandfather had a special way of selling his items out of the store. Can you tell them about that?
Yeah, I think it was probably my father that started that. It was, well, there just wasn't enough business in town, and after all, he had 6 kids to feed. And so he started taking the merchandise, samples of the merchandise, to the ranchers, and then they would order, and my father would send the order back to the store, and then the merchandise would go out through the post office. And they had 3 traveling trucks that they traveled as far north as the Tetons, and then all over Colorado, the western slope. And that probably kept the store afloat during the Depression. He had to figure out some way to keep it going because there wasn't that much business in our little town.
Did you do any ski jumping?
Yes.
We did.
Off that hill?
The big hill?
No, not the big one.
Well, at the side of what over there, for the carnival.
We did that because that's where the boys were.
The women competed on the second highest jump. It was a matter mostly of riding it rather than getting distance.
Oh, and just riding the hill under the jumps was quite a feat. I mean, it was steep.
Still is.
Still is.
They were all the time.
I tried it lately, Glow.
I'm not going to.
But I think maybe by the time we were in the 8th grade, freshman in high school, we pretty much quit jumping.
Did Gates Gooding start the old men's Roman candle dance? Where did it come from?
I guess, well, I think he thoroughly enjoyed burning other people's jackets. And it was sort of a war. You know, you'd point the Roman candle at each other, and it was really quite spectacular. And I'm afraid my son is carrying on. But yes, he did.
And could you tell us about your business?
The Yampa Valley M&E Company was a flour mill from 1896 when it was built until, well, we bought it in 1946. And it was probably only 2 years for us to find out that flour was no longer a viable product. All during the World War II years, there had been no flour available. Well, flour was available, but not bread. And so everybody baked at home, and that was what we bought, thinking that we could make flour. Family flour, which is made in little places, especially still through Utah. And it is the quality which is just right for 100 pounds at a time. It's not what bakers use. And it was a couple of years before we got the word that we needed to do something else, so we turned it into a feed mill. And there was that until 1966 or so.
And it was located where?
Yes, it was located where the Iron Horse is. But the reason the Iron Horse is there is because we had a spur from the railroad track that we shipped out grain occasionally and shipped in things too. And the railroad track was there long after we were. It burned in 1958, and that was a fire. Went as fast as the Cabin Hotel. The cabin was 100 rooms, and this, in terms of size, was 2 or 3 times that.
And you had grain stored there?
Yeah, we had, yeah, several years of barley and wheat were stored, and they burned for some years after the fire.
Gloria?
Yes.
I mean, you all can talk about this, but why don't you start? Tell us about the Cabin Hotel, and I think you remember the fire.
Indeed, indeed. Got out of school. I think it was in 38 or 39 when it 39 when it burned, and that time I was a senior in high school, and I was doing the Steamboat pilot. Let the school have about a half a page, or if we had a lot of news, a full page in the pilot. Only we had to write it ourselves. We couldn't just call it in. So I happened to be the editor of that particular little project, and so every once a week, a couple of days before the pilot was printed, I had to go down to the pilot with these notes and things. So that was fine because I got out of a study hall and I had to do it before noon. But this day I wasn't terribly crazy about it because it was 20 below at noon. It was almost noon when I was walking down there, and I went to the pilot office and opened the door, and Charlie Leckenby, who was the editor then, Charles Leckenby that many of you know, Charlie, or Chuck, that was his grandfather, and Charlie was the editor then, and so I walked in, and his desk was right up there near the door, and Charlie just grabbed me, he just jumped up and grabbed me, he took the papers out of my hand and threw them on his desk and grabbed me by the arm and took me out the door and said, "It's the Cabin Hotel on fire. Let's go." We were 2 blocks from it, you see, from the pilot, so we roared down there, and no fooling, 35 minutes later, it was gone. It was gone. Yeah. It must have been just, paper, very cardboard or something. And it went, and at 20 below, the firefighters had a little trouble getting any water on it, and everybody in town, of course, came to it, and which happened with many fires, as a matter of fact. And there was so much, soot and stuff, great big lumps of stuff, that Annie and I lived way up there on Crawford Hill, far from it, and our lawns, it was winter, of course, our lawns were just covered with this black stuff for days, So it was a sensational fire, and 2 people were killed in it. And if it had been at night, because we had teachers, we had teachers who lived there, they needed a place, to stay.
What started the fire, Gloria?
I think just the overheating of the furnace. They had a huge furnace, and it was such a cold day that it had to go, and there was never arson or anything like that. It was simply that.
Do any of the others of you have any recollections of that you'd share with us, or?
Well, I believe Annabeth and I both were in the same class. We knew it was the Cabin Hotel, but we were in shorthand class, and our teacher wouldn't let us out until that whistle blew, and then we got to go.
Anne?
We were furious.
I was out of school by then. The fact is, I'm the old lady in the crowd.
Well, I have one other question that was posed by a Mr. Tyler Gooding. We have a car race every year here, the vintage car race. So here's the $64,000 question. what was and where was the first sports car race?
Well, it was started by a young man who was a lab dental technician, and he lived catty-cornered from us. His name was Jim Shiner, and he and my husband sort of dreamed it up along with some of the other fellows in town, and it caught on. It really caught on great. So the town was, there were hay bales all around, and they did have some cement blocks like we do now. I believe, I don't remember where it started, but I know it came up 11th Street and on, what was the name of your street?
Yamanite?
No.
Crawford.
No, Crawford. And it came around Crawford, went down Yamanite and across the bridge and over to 7th. And then they had to make that sharp turn onto 6th. And then they go down to Oak, and then they'd have to come back, and they just kept going around and around. And great excitement, terrible noise. But, and then there was a big band put afterwards. I remember the British ambassador was here to watch it. But it was a big thing in the town. But I don't believe we ever had it again.
Beautiful cars.
Beautiful cars.
Was it in the mid-50s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When Jim Shiner was working for Dr. Slavin.
Right.
Yeah. But it was fun.
You and Wilbur Rule.
Wilbur Rule was in on it, yeah.
Got
Well, I'm going to open this up to the audience here in a minute, but before we do that, why don't you tell us what you've kind of done, and I mean, you know, I can kind of tell them what you've done, but what you're doing now, maybe what you've done, like Annabeth, I know you've been married and how many kids you have, and what you're kind of doing in the community now.
Well, I've been married 156 years. And it's been fun. I shouldn't say that, say it like it was too much. Have 2 children, have 9 grandchildren, and we all live in Steamboat Springs.
Oh.
We all feel very fortunate.
And she's one of our best volunteers at the museum.
I volunteer at the museum. Oh, I quilt. That's it.
Gloria?
Well, I've been in a few organizations hither and yon. Don't just grin at me, dear. And, you know, that sort of thing. And then when we had our ranch, I was the chief accountant for the ranch, and my brother and sister-in-law lived on the ranch, and my brother actually ran the ranch, but I did the accounting and things like that. But of course, we don't have the ranch now, so I'm retired, and so that's what I say. But it takes more time sometimes to be retired than it did to have a regular job. So that's it for me.
Well, my husband and I had the abstract title insurance business for many years. And after his death, I ran the business for a few years and then sold the plant part of it to Transamerica Title. And then I decided I wasn't going to spend any more winters in Steamboat, so for 20 winters I've been going to Arizona and coming back here summers. And obviously I'm retired too.
And how many children do you have?
I have 2 boys and 2 grandsons and 1 granddaughter. Tyler is obviously here with his 2 boys, and my other son lives in Austin, Texas. And they have a granddaughter.
And Tyler's on our board of directors for the museum.
Yes.
Ann?
Well, I've been here my whole life, and I would say that my life has been one long, wonderful vacation.
And how many children do you have?
Just one.
And she lives here now?
But she lives here next door. And a couple of children.
You should know, that those of you that don't know, that Ann has in the past been one of our expert wildflower leaders and knowledgeable, and she takes, everybody used to take it. Do you still do this? You still do this
I haven't,
occasionally.
for 3 or 4 years. I could go back yet again and would like to.
Does wildflower tours, as does Karen Vale over here. So they're kind of in cahoots together, I think. Any questions from the audience? And I don't think that you should hold back with what you asked.
This isn't very positive, but was there any crime back when you were younger days?
Just us.
Just.
Was the main thing that guy that you were around with the torture kid? No, there wasn't.
There wasn't.
It was nice.
I think our generation did most of the things that the policemen came after.
Tell us about the police department.
Oh, we had one day policeman and one night policeman. And we loved them all. We loved them both. And they were just great to us. They thought we were really scared of them, but we weren't.
How were the police called? This is interesting.
Marshall.
No, how were they notified of
Telephone.
There wasn't a 911.
I don't know.
No.
Well,
They sort of drove around a lot.
yeah, but the thing that I remember was that between the Harbor Hotel and the phone company, which was across the street, there was a light across the
Oh, that's right, I
And when
forgot
the phone
that.
company got a call that someone needed the police, well, they turned on the red light.
That's because the cop was probably having coffee at the Harbor Hotel.
Probably right,
But it's amazing how two men controlled the crime and with this many people. And they did.
Halloween was the only bad time.
Halloween was bad.
What would happen?
Oh my. Well, there were still some outhouses, of course, and clotheslines got cut, and windows got soaked. The
buggies were placed on the
top of the high school, and there was a goat put into the principal's office.
Live goat.
A silver goat. I remember.
But I think we didn't get expelled from school very often.
There were still, it isn't all that pure. There were a few murders and bank robbers.
Oh, sure.
Robberies. We had our share of bad pennies.
Oh, yeah.
But not a lot.
In proportion, probably.
We had one bank robbery that I can remember. This man lived out on the Pine Grove Road, and he dressed in a woman's clothing, and he tried to take off on a horse, and of course they caught him at the end of town.
He served some time.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, his name was Chick Yock. I'll never
Chick
forget.
Yock.
Oh, yeah, Chick Young. Oh, yeah. How about the circus riot?
Oh, that was inclusive. We weren't very little then, but there was a circus.
there was a
Yeah, they
circus
found
riot.
cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, you tell them about that.
I don't know.
You tell them about that.
Well, I guess that the city, I guess they had to get a permit or something from the city to have the circus and I don't know, I guess the circus was gypping people so badly. And so when some of the city officials said something about it, soon there was a riot, and of course, you know, all the city people that had been gypped were happy to riot, and the circus people were probably just defending their lives, so, in this wild western town.
But I think they were tougher than the city people.
I think they were too.
But it was a great place to grow up in.
Did you still have Indian families living around at all? I mean,
Not that I recall.
no, they had moved on by then.
We had one family, and they had a lot of money. Their name was Gordon. They came all the way from Oklahoma.
But we didn't consider them Indians.
They were.
I know, but I mean, they didn't have tails and stuff, feathers.
No.
They were good though. They made a lot of money.
They ran the second theater in town. Imagine, 1,300 people, we had 2 theaters.
Was that where the chief came
Yes,
from?
and the other one was across the street about where Allen's store is now. And the chief was pretty much the same size, only it was one big theater then. And they may have absorbed a couple of shops that were at the side there now, but we had, I think, 7 filling stations in town. Yeah, at least, and 2 drugstores, and only about 1 restaurant, as I remember, except for the Cabin Hotel.
Mountain Home and
The Ever-Ready.
And the Ever-Ready, yeah.
And the motel's all closed up all winter.
Oh, yeah.
I might add the movie theater in competition with the Chief Theater was the Bouncy Ball one, you know. That I can just barely remember that.
Yeah.
What about supermarkets? Did you have a supermarket here?
Oh, we had 2.
We called them grocery stores.
Yeah.
We had the Boys Market and Safeway didn't come in till later, did it?
No.
Center Grocery. And they were the only 2. Oh, and then Shelburne's Market.
At the risk of almost starting a riot, can I ask what you think of what the town is doing today?
For me, it's scary.
It's just growing so fast.
It's going so fast.
How large is Steamboat Springs?
Is that all?
Permanent
No, it's about
87.
No, the census was 11,000.
No,
I just got the census about 2 days ago.
Okay. So
Yeah,
what,
they said-
87, you said?
About 87. That's just the town, permanent population.
But then when everyone comes, where do we go? 20,000?
Yeah, how many pillows do we have now? Is it something like 16 or 17,000
I
pillows?
think so.
Yeah,
Something
16
like
for
that.
sure.
Yeah. And it's growing every day.
Yes.
In the summertime, did you guys use the river for any recreational activity, or were you afraid of the river?
We swam in
We
it.
didn't use the river.
Fishing.
Just fishing.
No.
We did a lot of swimming. But we didn't even, no, we didn't have inner tubes, did we?
No. They were in my car.
Marty, could they, I can tell that there are people in the audience that have obviously were your compatriots. Would they mind identifying them or telling us who you all are? I mean, I know there's a cousin here and there's,
Let's see, Carl, why don't you and Jan tell how long you've lived here and
Well-
how you know these ladies?
We just been good friends forever and ever, I don't know.
We have.
Yeah. My family moved here in 1945, and I was a freshman in high school at that time, just starting high school at that time, which kind of puts me about 10 years older than, roughly 10 years older than the ladies, but we've been good friends for a long, younger.
Were you put in the band?
Younger.
Were you put in the band?
No. At that time, there was definitely a separation between city and, town and country. And we lived at my family ranch, that we lived in the country, and I couldn't afford to stay in town and play in the band at that time. It just wasn't possible to do it. We did ski though. Everybody skied.
Everybody skied.
Everybody skied.
Self-defense.
Anybody in this row behind them? No. How about back here? Anybody? Sariva?
I'm Sariva Towler. I spent the last 30 years interviewing these ladies and writing the history of the valley based on what they've shared, which is quite rich.
Anybody back here? Catherine?
They're my resource people.
Okay. Okay, this row back here. Mr. Anderson? You known them for a long time?
I know all of them, know them very well.
For a long time.
We moved, my family, we moved here in 1926. I went to high school in Grand Junction. And The town has sure changed.
Diane?
Oh, well, I grew up here, and Annabeth's dad and my dad were brothers, and then I got married, and my husband took me to the Midwest for 4 years. And we've been back 6 years, and I'm lucky enough to live in FM Lights House.
Anybody, Corlin, past you? Corlin happens to be an Utterback by marriage, so she knows this house very well and is one of our volunteers.
Well, I'm Bob Beverly, and I was born and grew up here, and I didn't date these ladies because they were older than I.
Not that much.
Take some by 1 year. But my folks wanted me to learn to dance, and there was a group learning, and there was a lady up the street that I was supposed to pick up and take to dance. And the first dance I went to learn was with Annabeth. He probably doesn't remember that. She was going with, somebody younger than she was. Not by much. But anyway, I graduated in 41, and it was a great place to grow up.
Anybody else in that row? Manita? This is a country girl now.
Yes, I'm from the country. My grandparents homesteaded here. They were here, the Indians were here when they came. And I went to the country school until I graduated in 8th grade. Then I came into town and I started class with Gloria, and then I got sick for 1 year, seriously ill, and had to drop out. So I actually graduated with Doris and Annabeth. And so my roots are very deep. I love this country, and I don't ever want to live anywhere else. Amen. Lloyd?
Natalie?
I was born here in 21, so you know how long ago that is.
Anybody else next?
Natalie.
I came out here from Iowa in 1933 to work for Dr. Willett, who was my uncle, and had the hospital on 7th Street, which is now the theater. And I taught school, Alta Mesa, and Southside schools, and married a rancher, and I'm still here.
Anybody else in that row? I can't quite see the around here. Anybody? Dee?
No, I'm a newcomer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Not really.
All right, fess up. I'll tell you don't.
We know better, Dee.
No, I've only lived here for 48 years. So I really am not, I didn't go to school here.
Well, glad you tell what you've done for the last 30 of those
trouble.
Everything.
Well, I was the editor of the newspaper for about 26 years. And when Chuck left, I left.
Gertrude?
I came with my family in 49. And met Gloria, I think that year, you and your mom came out to Colorado.
Yeah, right.
Remember that?
Right, we did, yeah.
And the others I met a little later. And was gone for a little while, but came back and intend to stay.
Anybody else in that front row?
Arlene.
Eileen?
Arlene.
My husband and I came with a son who was 3 years old in July after we came in the spring, 1939. That's 59 years ago last spring. And the country was much different. It was a Saturday night town. Everybody came to town to buy their groceries, bring their their eggs or whatever they had. And then we were on the street watching the people and visiting, and then there was always a big dance.
Well, we need to do.
Where was the dance, Eileen?
Well, there was a big hall that is in the area, or was in the area, next to the rodeo road, isn't it?
I was thinking I was wondering if
it was the Chieftain Ballroom.
Yeah.
And you're right, it was the road that goes to the rodeo.
To the rodeo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a big hall.
It was
A lot of
huge.
people.
We had a fight there every Saturday night with people from Oak Ridge.
Wherever.
Huh?
I mean, there just was a fight.
Yeah.
There were good bands that came through.
We had imported bands.
And you wouldn't miss a Saturday night dance.
And then sometimes I came on Wednesdays, remember?
Yeah, live bands these were, nationally known.
But the country was so much different. When we came as dairy people, and there were over 90 dairies in the valley.
Oh.
There were trucks that went around and picked up the 10-gallon cans, and there was butter and cheese factory. And,
Really?
yes.
We had a creamery here. Was that down Selch's Creamery?
Across the street from the REA building.
No, that was Selch's.
Well, it was before that, it was a butter and cheese factory.
Yeah, yeah.